Hey everybody, the Book Dad here. Welcome back to the channel, and welcome to the mid-year recap of what I have been reading to my kids so far this year in 2025. When I first started this channel, one of the things that I wanted to do as the Book Dad was to share the love of reading aloud to my kids that I have found over the last several years. One of the greatest experiences for me as a parent is being able each night to read to my kids and share some of the stories that were important to me and my wife, and new stories that will help them learn to have a love of reading just like all of us have. So one of the ideas for videos that I had on this channel was to share maybe on every 6 months, so at mid-year and then at the end of the year, the books that I've been reading to them. And hopefully this will give all of you an idea as to the types of books that you could read to your kids, things that they like, maybe some things that they didn't like as much, or maybe things that I didn't like as much, which you might see a little later on in this video with some of the things that I've read this year. But just to let you know what things are great to read to kids and what are the things that they enjoy and that they like, and that will help give them a love of reading as they grow up and continue to learn in school and hopefully get something a little extra at home. So each 6 months, as I share with all of you on the channel what are the books that I've read to my kids, hopefully it'll help you get an idea of what some of the great books are that we can all read to our families. So before I start that, I'd like to delve into a little bit of statistics. I really love statistics. So I've compiled the numbers from the last several years to give you an idea of what it is that I do in our family. So I started this trend in 2021 of reading to my kids each night. And basically we have a routine that we have at this point set in stone, and it works really well for us. Now I understand that of course every family is different and you do the things that work for you, and that's great. But for us, so every night when it gets time for bedtime, we send the kids to get ready, and then we have a little short family time where we do some scripture reading and have a family prayer together. And then after that, I read them a chapter from whatever the latest book is that I'm reading aloud to them. And I usually try to keep it to about a chapter every night. Of course, that depends on what books we're reading. Some, like, they're Roald Dahl books where chapters are like 1 page, and so I might read 2, 3, 4 chapters of those. And then on the other hand, you might have a Harry Potter book where the chapter is like 30, 35 pages long, and that's a bit much, and so I'll maybe cut that in half or something. But I'd say on average, I usually try to read about a chapter every night to them. So, like I said, we started this in 2021, about the same time when we moved into this house that we live in right now. And so from that point, that's when I first started reading to them the Harry Potter series. That's what we started it out with. A great series to start out with, classic. And so we started with Harry Potter, and in that year, 2021, I finished the first 4 books reading aloud to them. Then in 2022, I read a total of 9 books. And then from there to 2023, I read 16 books aloud to the kids. And then last year, 2024, we read the most ever, and I got to 18 books that I read to them. And again, the numbers, I know, the numbers don't matter that much as long as you're reading to your kids. But I like to keep track of that kind of stuff. I like to make lists and keep track of numbers and see how many, and try to beat last year's number if I can. Or, that's why I like Goodreads a lot. It lets you create all those lists and see your totals at the end of the year of how many pages and how many books and everything you read. So I really like that kind of stuff, keeping track of it. And it helps me, so maybe it'll help you too. So anyways, yeah, last year we got to 18 books, and a lot of that I think was because we read some shorter, like Roald Dahl books and things like that. And then so then now up to this year, from January through June, I read 7 books to my kids. And so if you take all of that together, that's basically four years in total. Over the course of 4 years, I ended up reading 54 books aloud to my kids. And that's just doing basically, like I said, about a chapter every night. And so we're averaging 13 and a half books a year, as reading to them. And so it's really been great. And I'm not doing this to like toot my own horn or say like, oh, I'm awesome, I read this much to my kids, but just to show that if you set a habit and you stick to it and you do it every night, you'll be amazed after a year, 2, 3, 4 years, how many books total you've ended up reading to your kids, how much you've got through. So it builds on itself and really is impressive when you get some time under your belt doing it, and you'll see how much of an impact it has on your kids and on your family. And that's the one of the main reasons that I wanted to start this channel, is to kind of share my experience and encourage all of you out there that, hey, you can do this too. Like, and maybe some of you are, and that's awesome. But if you're not, that's okay. You can do it too. You just start small and work your way up. And before you know it, you'll be just like my kids. Every night when I finish a chapter, they'll be like, Dad, read another chapter. Keep it up. And I'm like, no, go to bed. So it's a great experience. And so now let's get to see what we've done this year so far. I'll share with you all what we've gotten to. So the first thing that we read this year was part of a series, and that's what I've got here. I don't know if you can tell from that picture, but it is Rick Riordan's The Kane Chronicles. Now, obviously, Rick Riordan is famous for the Percy Jackson series, and there's a good reason for that, because the Percy Jackson and the Olympians books are great. It's a 5-book series. It's what put Rick Riordan on the map. And after he finished that, he decided to do something else. But basically, he tried to take the formula from Percy Jackson and switch it over into a story about the Egyptian gods instead of the Greek gods. And here in this story, you have kind of a Percy Jackson imitation. And that is both good and also bad, because while I do love Percy Jackson, and that is one of the series that I have read completely to my kids, and they loved it too. And I actually read that series all alone by myself before I even read it to my kids. So I've read the whole Percy Jackson series twice. Now, with the Kane Chronicles, I'm afraid that Rick Riordan did not reach the same heights. It feels a bit like a copycat. And unfortunately, the characters in these books are not as solid as the ones in Percy Jackson. Basically, you have two main characters, siblings, Carter and Sadie Kane, who, much like Percy Jackson, find out that there is more to their family than meets the eye. And they end up getting thrown into this adventure where they learn family secrets and history, and that there's these connections with the Egyptian gods, who all start to make appearances in the book, just like the Greek gods in Percy Jackson. And there's magic, there's intrigue, it's a globe-trotting adventure. They're moving from one country to the next. And all of that sounds great, right? It sounds amazing. But in practice, like in theory, it sounds amazing, but in execution, he didn't quite nail it. I don't know what it is. One of the problems that I had with this series was that it goes back and forth each chapter from like, the structure of it is that Carter and Sadie Kane are basically, after the fact, recording their adventures as they remembered them that they already accomplished. And so the beginning of each chapter is them, like pretending to talk into a microphone, into a tape recorder, and talking about whatever this, chapter is about. And so you get these little like asides where they're like arguing with each other or making jokes or digs at each other. And it's just kind of lame. I don't know. I don't really like that structure. I think you just should have just straightforward told the story. You don't need these little mechanics to make it more, I don't know what he's trying to do, make it more accessible or find a way to put in some more jokes or something, but it just doesn't work. And the other problem that I have with this book is it is big for a kid's book. This thing, what did we get to? Yeah, it's over 500 pages, 516 pages in a paperback. Like, that is way too long for a book like this. they could have cut easily 200 pages from this thing, and it would have tightened it up and made it way better. So it just felt like it went on forever. And so while I wanted to like it, I just really didn't end up liking it. Now, from my kids' perspective, they loved it. They thought it was great. So it ended up being a bit of a chore for me, but hey, as long as they liked it, that's okay. I'm willing to go through that. Now, we continued on. The next book was The Throne of Fire, the second book. Oh, I forgot to say, the first book is The Red Pyramid of the Kane Chronicles. Now, the second book, The Throne of Fire. Now, in this book, this was better than the first book. I will give it that. It still had the same format like that I didn't like from the first one, where they're, pretending to, where they're, supposedly talking into a tape recorder or whatever, and switching from one, point of view, Carter and to Sadie, and back and forth. And so I wasn't a fan of that, but this was a better book. For one thing, it was shorter, so there was less of it. So less is better in the Kane Chronicles. But also, but I feel like that made the action a little bit tighter. They had, I think, a little bit better of a goal. Like in this book, they're basically trying to stop this evil force from destroying the world, kind of thing. And it was a little more focused on that goal. And there was also, I think the humor was done a little bit better in this second book. Overall, I liked it better. It still wasn't like a great book. It wasn't, I still found the voice of Sadie Carter to be a little annoying. Rick Riordan's trying to write for a teenage girl, and it just doesn't quite work. But other than that, like this was a much better effort than the first book. Now, I haven't gotten around to the third book yet. I'm kind of hoping the kids forget about it. So don't tell them. I'm just kidding. They'll probably watch this video. But and then we'll probably have to read the third book pretty soon. But yeah, the second book was better than the first one. But overall, as far as the Kane Chronicles series goes, it's fine. It's just it's not Percy Jackson. And it's probably not fair because, obviously Rick Riordan wrote one of the great all-time kids book series in Percy Jackson, and now he has to live up to it every other time he writes. So it's not fair to him, but hey, that's his fault for being good with the Percy Jackson series. Now, the next book that we read, and this is a nice copy that Bookwife bought a while back, is The Jungle Book. Now, this is by Rudyard Kipling. And this was, of course, written back in the 19th century, so this is an older work of classic children's literature. And I had never read this before. So obviously I'm extremely familiar with the Disney movie, The Jungle Book. I've seen that probably 100 times over the course of my life. And really, always, that was one of the Disney movies that I liked more than many of the other ones. So I liked that and the music from it and everything. But I never read the book. And this was interesting. So when you're talking about classic kids literature, one of the things that might dissuade people from reading it is that maybe it's a little bit more difficult to understand. The language, obviously, from the 19th century is a little more complex, a little heightened. But I've found that even if things are a little bit more difficult to understand for the kids, it's still worth getting into because the language is so beautiful. When you have somebody like a Rudyard Kipling or other famous children's authors, yeah, it might be a little bit hard to understand, but they're famous for a reason, and they are extremely good writers. And so even if maybe the kids don't understand every single word or every single passage, they still get the gist of it, and they do get to hear that use of language in a more heightened and classical sense. And it helps them to understand better when they read other books like the Kane Chronicles. So the interesting thing about The Jungle Book as a book is that it's split into a series of stories, and not all of them are about Mowgli and Baloo and Shere Khan and Bagheera, and all the names that we know from the Disney movie. Only a portion of them are about those. And then there are other stories that are about things that I've never even heard of before. So that was pretty cool. So it's got, let's see, one, two, three. Yeah, the first three stories in the table of contents, only those three out of seven total stories are the stories about Mowgli and the actual story that we know from the Jungle Book. The rest of them are about other tales, and there's so all of a sudden, you go from the jungles of India to a bunch of seals trying to escape people that are attacking them, and like an oceanic type voyage story with the seals. And then there's a story about a mongoose named Rikki Tikki Tavi and his battle with some cobras that are in near this family that he lives with. And that one was actually, I think, my kid's favorite from this collection was the Rikki Tikki Tavi story. And then there's a story about some elephants, and that I think was the weakest of the stories in this book, but it was still fine. And then the final story was a series of animals that are associated with the army, the British army that was there in India as occupiers, and all of the animals that are associated with the different ranks of soldiers and people in that army, and those animals talking to each other and kind of comparing their jobs with each other. And that was a pretty good one too. So overall, and one of the other cool things about this book is, if you're familiar with the movie, the story in the book, it is similar, and you could definitely see where the movie got where the movie got its parts from, but the book is a little more brutal, and so it's a nice change of pace, and it's funny to see how certain things would have been fine in book and literature form back then that obviously would not make it into a Disney movie. But nevertheless, it was good. It was a good story and great. So we really love this one, The Jungle Book. I fully recommend this one by Rudyard Kipling. And I know that there's more Rudyard Kipling works out there about animals and things that we might get to at some point. So that was great. All right. The next thing that we came across that we read was one of my absolute favorite authors to read aloud to kids, and that is Roald Dahl. He is awesome. And I think at some point here I want to do a video about all of the works that I've read to my kids by Roald Dahl, because he is great. If you're reading them to yourself, they're also good, of course. The writing is very pointed and crisp and also hilarious. But if you're reading it aloud, there are just the passages and sounds and things that he puts in there that are so fun to read aloud to kids, and they think it's hilarious and they'll be laughing. So do yourself a favor. Like if you want to have a good reading experience with your kids, start with a Roald Dahl book. They're almost all excellent. Some are slightly better than others, but there really aren't any clunkers in all of them. So this one is James and the Giant Peach, and this book was really great because it's another book where there's a movie of, and I actually have never seen the movie of this one. It looks like one of those cool stop motion animated type things, but I've never seen that, and so I didn't know anything about this particular story other than it's a pretty descriptive title. So you wonder what the heck is going to happen with Giant Peach and how it happens, but so there's obviously an element of kind of magical realism in this. And so the story is pretty straightforward. I mean, James comes across some, I can't remember what it was, magic seed or something that ends up growing a peach and several bugs and insects in his yard into giant proportions from one day to the next. And then he ends up getting inside of the peach and it rolls off and they start off on a great adventure. And the peach goes across the ocean, and as you can kind of see on the cover here, eventually makes it to New York somehow. So I won't really tell any more than that. I mean, it's just a funny, interesting story that has lots of action in it and lots of magic and little interesting creatures and surprises and twists. One of the nice things about Roald Dahl books is they're usually pretty short, so you get through them very quickly. And also, these editions, and I don't know if every single Roald Dahl book has these, but these are illustrated by Quentin Blake. And, his illustrations are really great. They're kind of like they look a little bit childish, but they're really great. And so yeah, the illustrations are great in this. Every couple of pages you come across a new illustration, so the kids like to look at them too. I really enjoyed this book, and I couldn't recommend it enough. Any Roald Dahl book is great to read aloud to kids. Okay, so the next book that we read was another classic, and this one is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. It's a combination of the two stories in one book. And this, again, is another fancy leather-bound copy that Bookwife bought at some point. And of course, she loves purple, so you know that we're going to get, if there's a classic book that's leather-bound and it's in purple, you can bet that we have it. This is written by Lewis Carroll, again from the 19th century. So another book where when you're reading classic literature to your kids, you come across sometimes passages that might be a little bit difficult to understand, but the story really shines through. And my kids understood it, I think, pretty well, and they enjoyed it. And I think anybody's kids would. And especially one thing that you can do when it comes to if classic literature for children, if you want to start reading those types of books to, help them gain a little bit more culture and a little bit more education and expose them to bigger words and things of that type, which are all great for kids. I think I totally agree with that strategy. But one thing that you can do that might help is to start with books that are associated with movies that they're already familiar with. So, for example, like the Jungle Book that we read earlier, and then like Alice in Wonderland, of course, another Disney movie, and there have been the live action movies as well more recently, but material that they are already familiar with the story from the movie, and then as you read the book, that might help them get past some of the more difficult language to understand because they already have in their head an idea of what's going on. So, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, like they're split into kind of two halves of the same story. I think I prefer the first half better, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. That's the one that we're mostly familiar with from the Disney movie. It has most of that action in it, but it is a little bit more fantastical, has more creatures and interesting things that are happening. And Through the Looking Glass, Lewis Carroll gets into this whole chess metaphor, and so instead of talking with the caterpillar on top of a giant mushroom, now Alice is talking to the red queen and the white queen and the knights and the different chess pieces, and is trying to move across part of the land that's basically like a chessboard, and it's all sort of set up like that. And I don't know that my kids really, I mean, they got sort of the basic idea that it's about chess, I suppose, but they probably weren't, and even myself, I don't know that I was really following the finer points of it, like if it's actually happening as if a game of chess would happen. But either way, it was still pretty good. And I will say, there is one of the funniest passages that I have ever read aloud to my kids in Through the Looking Glass. When she's talking to, I think it was the White Knight, and he's just sort of this hapless doofus who keeps falling off of his horse, and she has to like help him get back on, and then he like falls off again. I swear I was laughing my head off. I was laughing so hard I couldn't get through it. It was so funny. I couldn't believe like how well the comic timing of that chapter went. And this is written, 100 years ago or something. More than that, maybe. And so it was really great. So just for that chapter alone, I would recommend Through the Looking Glass. But of course, as a pair, very great story, classic, and my kids loved it. Okay, what do we got next? Another Roald Dahl book. So, like I said, I love these books. I love Roald Dahl. He's super fun to read. And this one is George's Marvelous Medicine. This might be one of his lesser known ones. It's extremely small, extremely short. I don't even think it's 100 pages. It's probably like, yeah, it's like 88 pages. So this one is very short, very quick. You probably get through it in, maybe 3 or 4 nights. But again, it's got the great illustrations by Quentin Blake. They're, all throughout. Every couple of pages has those. Very good. And this story is a prime example. This perhaps where this phrase was invented. Kids, don't try this at home. This story is the epitome of that phrase because basically it's about George, who has a horrible grandmother, a grandmother that is despised by him and his whole family, basically. And so, in order to try and get her to change or to be nice, he basically takes a giant pot throughout his house and fills it up with every single thing he can find. So there's like shampoo, toothpaste, um, things from the kitchen, different spices. It goes into the garage and puts like motor oil and like different food and medicines for the pigs and the chickens and cows that they have, and just all the medicines that they have in their medicine cabinet at home, and basically creates this giant boiling stew, this potion, and then feeds it to his grandma, and hilarity ensues. So it's another funny book. Uh, it has one of the things about Roald Dahl is he doesn't mince words. Like if somebody is bad or horrible, he says it. Like he's like, this grandma is like the worst grandma ever, or like if somebody's fat or ugly or whatever, any sort of negative thing, he straight up sticks it to him. Like he doesn't uh, prance around anything. Like he just tells it like it is, and so it's I like that about Roald Dahl. I think it's really funny, and definitely kids, I think that it's funny as well, and can appreciate the humor that he puts into things. And one of the things about Roald Dahl is he doesn't write down to kids. That's one of the things that as you read books specifically written for children, a lot of times, and especially I think in modern times, you get authors that don't treat children as if they know what's up. They write to them as if they're stupid. But kids aren't stupid. Like kids know what's going on. They are smart. They see things that we don't realize that they see. And Roald Dahl treats them like, maybe not like adults, but he treats them as if they are intelligent. And so I think that's one of the reasons why my kids love these books so much, is because he doesn't mince words. He treats them like they're smart, and he has a lot of hilarious words and turns of phrases in his books that are great. And so, yeah, another one that I fully recommend, George's Marvelous Medicine. A short but great book. All right, we're down to the last book, so from the first half of this year. And again, another classic. We've read a lot of classics this year. So I guess it makes up for the Kane Chronicles earlier. But this is Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. And this book is probably, I would say definitely the most difficult of the books that we've tackled so far this year. Again, a classic written in the 19th century. There's a lot of good books written in the 1800s for children. But this book is definitely the hardest to understand just from a language perspective, I would say, because a lot of this book takes place on a ship in the ocean and is dealing with pirates and adventure and that sort of thing. But there's a lot of sea language, right? There, different parts of the ship, different parts of the sails and the ropes and the rigging and things that even I didn't know what it was talking about. I could get it from context, what was going on, but it might be a little bit difficult for some kids to follow. But overall, it was still good. And another thing with this book, like I said, things that can help kids understand books that are older is to read books that you've seen a movie based on. Now, my kids hadn't watched the movie yet, but after we finished this book, they watched Muppet Treasure Island, and that movie's hilarious. So that maybe that in retrospect that helped them remember some of the parts from the book that they read. Again, it's not totally accurate to the text, but it is surprisingly accurate, and it might change some of the characters, maybe from male to female, depending on the Muppet that's portraying them and that sort of thing. But it was pretty good. I thought it was a pretty good adaptation. But this book tells the tale of young Jim Hawkins and his adventures in finding a treasure map from a pirate, and then following that map and his ongoing adventures with Long John Silver, who has mysterious origins and is eventually found out to be a pirate. And so the story is exciting and adventurous, but it's not as fast paced and exciting as modern books, for sure. It's definitely a little bit slower and a little bit harder to understand, but still totally worthwhile reading. And the benefit of reading a book like this, again, is to give your kids some experience in listening and interpreting language that's a little bit above their reading level. And I think that's great. And it'll give them confidence as they move forward in life and start reading their own books and moving on to bigger and better books and more classics as they get into middle school and high school and beyond. If you're reading these kinds of books to them as kids, it gives them that confidence that they can pick up something that maybe looks a little daunting at first and know that they can get through it and understand it and have a good reading experience. So for that, I can definitely recommend Treasure Island. And I just maybe wouldn't start with something like this. Maybe kind of work your way up to it if you read other classics like Alice in Wonderland and things like that first. So, but a great book. So those are the 7 books that we've read so far in the first 6 months of this year that I've read to my kids aloud. It's been great. I've had a lot of fun doing it. And I'm looking forward to another 6 months to the end of this year of reading a lot more interesting and good kids books. So I encourage all of you out there to do the same. Read to your kids each night, help them understand what it is that you're reading, imbue in them this love of the magic of books and the magic of reading. It's one of the greatest things that you can give to your kids, and it will bless them throughout their entire lives. So I hope you've had a good time seeing what I've read to my kids over these past 6 months, and I hope I've given you some ideas on some of the things that you can read to yours. I appreciate all of you being here. If you're new to the channel, please like and subscribe, and continue seeing the different kinds of books that you can read to your kids, as well as some of the other reviews of books that I'm reading for myself. So I appreciate you all being here, and until next time, make sure you read to your kids every night. All right, see ya.